Things are never gonna be the same now.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy. So is the MCU dead? I mean, that's what the internet's been saying after the Secret Invasion finale hit a new low for Marvel Studios. So we're going to dive deep into that question. First, I'm going to explain all the reasons the MCU could be in a death rattle, along with all the other big franchises. But then I'm going to talk about why you haters out there just need to calm down.
Don't tell me to calm down.
Calm down, buddy.
Oh, suddenly I feel very calm. Thank you.
Now first, I want to take a look at the state of Marvel Studios and briefly talk about how we got here. Now I'm going to be drawing from two sources here. One is the excellent Story of Marvel Studios by Tara Bennett, which is kind of like the Disney authorized version of the studio's history, and the other is the upcoming book, The Reign of Marvel Studios by Joanna Robinson, Dave Gonzalez, and Gavin Edwards. This book is great and gets a little bit more into what's happening in the studio after Avengers Endgame. Now I covered some of this information in our recent WTF Happened to Secret Invasion video, so if you saw that video, don't worry, I'm going to talk about a lot of new information too. And I have to talk about the history of this studio and how they do things because that's the only way to understand if the Marvel method can still continue to work in the future. Now, first of all, we have to understand that Marvel Studios has always operated completely differently from every other studio in Hollywood. Normally, a screenwriter writes a screenplay, a studio buys the screenplay, the movie enters pre-production, storyboarding, animatics production, and then post-production. That process takes a very long time. But Marvel has created all sorts of shortcuts so we can, say, get a new Captain America movie every couple years.
Ooh, what are those shortcuts?
Well, with Iron Man, they entered production without a finished script, which suited Jon Favreau's indie improvisational style just fine. But visual effects take a really long time to create, so they pre-planned action sequences and wrote much of the script around those sequences. Marvel called this visual development, and this is pretty much how they've made every other film after 2010. Director Lucretia Martel even said that she turned down Black Widow because they told her not to worry about the action sequences because they were pre-planned in advance. So in a weird way, Marvel had evolved into a giant TV show.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you see, on most TV shows, the producers have total control of the creative, and the directors are more day players brought in to execute the producer's vision. In films, it's the opposite. Producers hire directors for their creative vision, which is ironic for reasons we'll talk about in just a bit.
Hey, what did you do last night?
Dude, me and my buddy had a little bit too many, and then we rented Kindergarten Cop 1 and 2.
There's a Kindergarten Cop too?
Yeah, dude, with Dolph Lundgren. It's awesome.
Who wants some chocolate chunk cookies?
Oh, there he is now.
Kill me.
Hey, what's up, man? Did you bring back the movies?
No, I'm dying.
Yeah, I've been there before, man, when you overdo it and you feel like this in the morning.
But you drank a lot too. Why don't you feel bad?
I feel great because last night I drank a Z-Biotic.
What? What's a Z-Biotic?
Well, a Z-Biotic is a pre-alcohol probiotic. It's actually the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Guys, Z-Biotics really works. I have a regular subscription that brings it to my house every single month.
Well, how does it work?
Well, let me explain. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. Now, it's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough day after drinking. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut, where you need it the most. So, here's how it works. You take a Z-Biotic before you start drinking, and of course, drink responsibly, get a good night's sleep, all that stuff. But look, I'm not kidding about this. I love Z-Biotics. This is holy nectar in my household. I don't drink very often, but when I do, it's good to know that I'm still going to have a good tomorrow.
Next time I'll use Z-Biotics. Yeah, we've heard that one before.
Believe me, you won't regret it. I highly recommend you try Z-Biotics. Go to zbiotics.com/screencrush or scan the QR code on the screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use the code ScreenCrush at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you are unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/screencrush and use the code ScreenCrush at checkout for 15% off. Thanks again, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this video. Now back to what I was saying. So actually, Marvel Studios' process of creating the visuals before the words was also a hallmark of the early Marvel comics. In the 1960s, Stan Lee was editing several books at once, so he would tell visionary artists like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko his ideas, and then they would create the stories so Stan Lee could fill in the word bubbles. So VizDev became the template for Marvel Studios basically after the Avengers. Now there are exceptions to this, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians 1 came about because Marvel staff writer Nicole Perlman championed the characters and wrote several drafts of the screenplay. Then James Gunn came in, made it a very James Gunn film, and ever since then, he has written the scripts before the storyboards and visual effects were prepped. So his films are one of the rare exceptions. But this is how Marvel is able to give us massive films like Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame in such short periods of time. But what's most important is that this worked because we loved the characters, and the creatives behind the films loved the characters too. And the entire franchise was anchored by the charm of Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark.
You've been called the Da Vinci of our time. What do you say to that?
Absolutely ridiculous. I don't paint.
So now let's talk about what this has become in more recent years. Avengers Endgame was not just a culmination of 20-something films, it was also a finale for several characters. It was like a baseball team winning the World Series, but then they had to let their best players go because their contracts were getting too expensive. So, following Avengers Endgame, Marvel lost their anchor, Robert Downey Jr., they lost their leader, Chris Evans, and everyone else from Phase 1 was essentially being phased out. The MCU didn't want to continue on with a different Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, so the franchise had to reinvent itself. And that's almost impossible because from now on, every single Marvel experience will be measured against Avengers Endgame. If a movie doesn't give us the thrill of Captain America doing this, then we're gonna feel a little let down.
So then can Marvel possibly reinvent itself?
Well, let's go back to 2019, post-Endgame. I would say at that time, the biggest stars of the franchise were Spider-Man, whose rights are held by Sony, and Black Panther. So Chadwick Boseman was set to be the new Robert Downey Jr., and then he sadly passed away. And their biggest remaining franchise, Guardians of the Galaxy, was cut short when Alan Horn temporarily fired James Gunn, which, by the way, will go down in film history as one of the stupidest, most short-sighted executive decisions
for the rest of all time.
So, post-Endgame, as we're building toward the multiverse saga, there were even reports that Marvel saw Jonathan Majors as the new face of their franchise, and boy has that backfired. Other great channels like Den of Nerds and Cosmic Wonder have been covering the Jonathan Majors case in way more detail, but let's just say that we have no idea what's going to be happening with that guy in movies and in the real world. And on top of that, the pandemic happened, delaying Marvel movies and disrupting like everything. So the pandemic forced a little too much importance on the Disney Plus shows. 2021 Disney Plus was top tier. WandaVision, Loki, Falcon Winter Soldier, Hawkeye, What If?
Sick goddamn!
And I need to note here that Marvel creating Disney Plus shows was a decision that was made by extremely wealthy Disney CEO Bob Iger, one of the few times that he actually interfered with Marvel Studios. But the Marvel team were excited about making Disney Plus shows, and they used the opportunity to tell stories that could not have been told in movies. WandaVision could have never been a movie. It's formatted for TV. And Loki also worked so much better as a TV show than it would have as a movie. Hawkeye was actually originally going to be a movie, but then they decided the story suited a TV show better.
Yeah, I disagree.
Me too. But in those first years, it felt like the MCU shows were all premium TV, starring movie stars with top-of-the-line visual effects. But the reign of Marvel Studios revealed that Marvel never really tried to adapt their stories to the television format. Instead, they saw their shows as long movies. And you can see that in failures like Secret Invasion. Each episode just kind of stops, and the individual chapters don't have self-contained themes or stories. This is also particularly egregious with Moon Knight, which would have been a home run as a movie, but became repetitive when they split it up into episodic format. So Marvel Phase 4 was releasing more hours of programming than like all of their other phases combined. In 2022, Marvel Disney Plus really started to show the constraints of time and budgets. Ms. Marvel was mostly hit, but when it missed big.
Come run.
And She-Hulk really needed more time to get these VFX up to Marvel standards. There's a moment in the She-Hulk finale that joked about this, but was actually very revealing.
You are very expensive.
Oh, sure.
But wait until the camera is off you. The visual effects team has moved on to another project.
Okay.
Now notice the Wakanda Forever drums in the background. That movie looked great, and that showed how movies would always take precedence over the shows. Not that every multiverse saga movie's been up to the quality we expect after phases 1 through 3. No Way Home is a crowd pleaser, Black Widow and Multiverse of Madness are better than they get credit for, while Thor and the Eternals are like solidly mid movies that should have been great. Also, I like Quantumania, but I understand that I am all alone there.
That's okay, I really like The Flash.
No one asked you to start speaking.
Right you are, sorry about that.
The point is, for the first time in years, everything Marvel did was not amazing. Good, yes, but not always great, and occasionally bad.
Give me your gun, goddammit.
In fact, Multiverse of Madness is a great indicator about what's really gone wrong with this franchise. This is a good movie. It's a really good Sam Raimi movie. It's a good Doctor Strange sequel.
I love you in every universe.
But it's not a good MCU movie. The connection to the multiverse saga felt tenuous, substituting quick fix cameos for like real story intrigue. And the filmmakers did Wanda's character a disservice because they were not allowed to see WandaVision or read the scripts before they filmed.
Have you seen it? And no, they had not seen it because it wasn't finished yet.
But fans, myself included, were way too overhyped on our theories. We drive ourselves insane with expectations. Is Tom Cruise going to appear as Iron Man? People actually thought that Tom Cruise would cameo in Multiverse of Madness. Fans prepared themselves to expect a crossover event on the scale of Endgame, and when the movie failed to deliver, well, we were disappointed. So the MCU has become a victim of its own success.
But does that mean that the MCU is done? Will superhero movies go the way of the Western as Steven Spielberg predicted?
Well, alright, let me outline Marvel and Disney's nightmare scenario for you. Let's say that started in 2024, Marvel films no longer feel like must-see films. Captain Marvel made $1 billion in 2019 because people wanted to see if she could be the one to defeat Thanos. That movie would not make $1 billion today. So let's say that because of all the hours and hours and hours of content, MCU films and shows feel like homework. Audiences can't keep up. They feel overwhelmed, and it's easier to just check out. They may show up for characters they care about, like Spider-Man, but the MCU becomes like The Walking Dead, a story you stop following, but you might read an article now and then to keep up with what's happened to the characters on the show. Let's even say that the multiverse saga is way too confusing. The multiple timelines, variants, alternate realities, and no one really cares about the difference between a timeline, a reality, and a universe. Plus, the star of the multiverse saga, Jonathan Majors, becomes convicted of assault as more victims come forward, so Marvel is forced to recast that character. And then the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, who we support the strikers by the way, let's say that those cause more delays until it would have been 7 years between Avengers movies. It doesn't even feel like this franchise is connected anymore because there are no team-ups. Shang-Chi was a fan favorite movie and the character can't find room in this franchise for his own sequel. Meanwhile, James Gunn's Superman launches and it's a flop. The DCU is dead on arrival. Just like Steven Spielberg said, superhero movies are going the way of the Western. There's not even interest in the MCU X-Men, a franchise that's already been rebooted once. And then on a larger level, people stop caring about remakes or big franchises. They want fresh, innovative stories, like the wave of new filmmakers that overtook the studio system in the 1970s. The millennial versions of Spielberg, Scorsese, and Lucas create bold new dramas that capture the public's imagination while people just don't care about seeing aging stars reprise roles from their 20s and 30s. Disney's live-action remakes of animated movies continue to not work as all 3 of the 2024 releases bomb.
There's 3 live-action remakes coming out in 2024?
Yeah, Snow White, Lilo and Stitch, and a Mufasa prequel.
There's gonna be a Mufasa prequel? Person, this made-up scenario is getting out of hand.
It's not made up, they're really putting out a Mufasa prequel next year. So after all these bombs and flops, the major studios crumble into dust, and a fair, equitable Hollywood is born from the ashes, where the proletariat will rise up and get streaming revenue.
Okay, cool it, comrade.
Sorry, that was starting to go off the rails. But that is the nightmare scenario for Disney, and there are some indications that some of that could happen. When Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, and Fast X underperformed, critics concluded that the public was no longer interested in franchises, which is dumb and wrong. The public are less interested in those franchises. The Fast movies stopped being good as soon as they became self-aware.
We've now been on insane missions around the world, and I ain't got one single scar to show for it.
And Indiana Jones 5 is a great movie, but I understand why people didn't want to go see old Indiana Jones after being burned by the Crystal Skull. As for Mission Impossible, I think there's a sense from the public that they've already seen that movie before. In fact, the success of Maverick last year proves that fans aren't opposed to seeing aging stars have one last go-around. But Dead Reckoning was also overshadowed by the cinematic event of the decade, Barbenheimer. Now, this deserves a whole video essay, but the Barbenheimer phenomenon demonstrated that people want to get excited about movies. We want to leave the house, but we also want creativity, compelling characters, and top-tier filmmaking. We want to see things that we have not seen before. So the underlying message here is not that there's MCU fatigue or superhero fatigue, there is mid fatigue. Look at Marvel's biggest success of the year, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It is an incredible film, and on rewatch, I think it's the best of the Guardians trilogy. It was great, so we showed up. The underlying message here is make good movies. After all, if Secret Invasion was good, we wouldn't be talking about this. I mean, with Barbie, it was always going to make money. It's like the most popular toy of all time that millions of people have a strong personal identification with. But Greta Gerwig also crafted an incredible, inventive film that gives you an emotional connection to an object, because that object is tied to the personal feelings that people felt as children, the feeling of playtime. Now, this is the same childhood connection that gave us the exuberant glee of the portal scene in Endgame. It was like dumping all of your toys out and playing with them at the same time. So, can Marvel tap into that subconscious connection to our childhood, or is it going to be like Star Wars?
What do you mean?
Well, with Star Wars, fans usually made some connection to it in their childhood, whether it was the OT, the PT, or like whatever.
This is a senator. One must be presentable.
Well, let's see it.
Yeah, now. in this neighborhood.
So then, as adults, many fans just want Star Wars to make us feel the way it made us feel when we were kids. We want to relive that feeling of being a child. Instead of trying to capture something new, these fans are always trying to re-feel their past. They want to feel like a kid playing with their Star Wars toys.
Or leave them in the box and never touch them!
So with the MCU, are we always going to try to be re-feeling that ending of Endgame? If this is the case, then it won't matter if the MCU creates anything great that's new, because we're always going to be pining for what came before. Now, a lot of critics have also cited Deadpool and The Boys as proof that the superhero genre is hitting the end of its life cycle.
What do you mean? Deadpool and The Boys are great.
Yes, they are, but you see, there's a thought that genres go through stages. First is the classical era, when the rules of the genre are established. Think classical westerns like Stagecoach or The Gunfight at the OK Corral. There's the white hats and there's black hats. In superhero movies, this is very much like Superman the movie, or Batman, or Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. But then comes the revisionist period, when these classical tropes are challenged, like Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name trilogy. The hero becomes more of an anti-hero who fights for himself, but still has a heart of gold. You could argue that Zack Snyder's DC films are part of like the superhero revisionist era. But then the genre enters their parody period, when the audience knows the tropes so well that they can make fun of them. Best example ever for westerns is Blazing Saddles. There's one scene where Gene Wilder has a brilliant monologue where he tells the well-worn story of an old gunslinger walking away from the life after a small child challenges him to a duel. And then...
Little bastard shot me in the ass.
Parody is often seen as the death of a genre, but that's not really true. Austin Powers didn't kill James Bond films, but it did kill a certain kind of James Bond film. We can never take this kind of thing seriously again. So then Daniel Craig had to reinvent James Bond as a modern-day action hero. So parody often leads to reinvention, and neither Deadpool nor The Boys are really parody. Deadpool pokes fun at the conventions of superhero movies.
Superhero landing!
But it's also solidly a superhero movie first, even ending with the hero getting the girl. And The Boys is more of a satire. It uses the public's obsession with heroes to hold up a mirror to our politics and our own culture, connecting the love of superheroes with the tendency toward fascism and hero worship. For instance, Tommy Peterson in The Boys is an incel whose love of the hero Stormfront makes him become an insane xenophobe. And The Boys draw a parallel between him and the stereotypical Marvel fanboy. But they're not like talking about you. You're great. You are the best. But The Boys has also changed the landscape of superhero stories. For instance, this moment in the Dawn of the Seven.
Don't worry. Girls get it done.
That was a savage takedown of this.
Don't worry. She's got help.
And now, instead of pandering to female viewers with staged poses, the MCU has actually created female-led properties. I also think that superhero movies don't follow the same arc as the Western genre because the first superhero movie, Batman the movie, was a parody.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
So every movie since then is balancing humor with the pathos of being a hero. Sorry, I got off track. All of that is the nightmare scenario for Marvel Studios. All the reasons that critics say that the franchise is on its last legs and will be deader than Disco Dinosaurs. Note to self, copyright Disco Dinosaurs. But now I'm going to tell you why the MCU is not dead, why it's every bit as alive as the Disco Dinosaur animated series that I'm creating that's going to take the world by storm. In fact, I think that Marvel is actually in a stronger place than it has ever been.
But why?
Because Marvel has finally failed. I have an expression when I'm teaching: don't ever steal someone's mistakes from them. My entire life has been shaped by mistakes and embarrassment. It is the only way that we learn and grow. Marvel has finally made some mistakes, and really, they weren't even that bad.
Is this it? Is this all you can conjure?
Disney Corporate.
You see, the MCU had no studio interference for years, and it thrived. And as soon as the suits intervened, it faltered. This is the lesson the suits will take from that.
They want you to cook the dinner. At least they ought to let you shop for some of the groceries.
Just because the MCU has had one terrible show and a few misses does not mean that the franchise is dead. I mean, children, gather around. Let me tell you about the many supposed franchise killers from geekdom past. Star Trek was a canceled 3-season TV show. Critics hated the motion picture in Star Trek V. And then there was Star Trek Insurrection, a critical and financial flop that would have ended the TNG story if not for Terry Matalas giving the cast a grand finale in Picard Season 3. And there was also Star Trek Enterprise, cut short before its time, supposedly killing Trek on TV forever. And now Star Trek is thriving on television. Or look, there's James Bond. Her Majesty's Secret Service was the first film without Connery that supposedly killed the franchise. And then there was Die Another Day, the last film before the Craig era. Or let's even look at our beloved Star Wars. Some fans hated Return of the Jedi, said it killed the franchise because there were teddy bears defeating the Empire. Then they said the franchise died with The Phantom Menace, then with Attack of the Clones, then the Clone Wars movie, then The Last Jedi, Solo. And each time the world found ways to reinvent itself because the world is vast, amazing, and filled with potential for artists to come in and create incredible stories. In fact, one of the few actual franchise killers was Jaws 4, but that shark genre still continues. I mean, The Meg 2 just came out. The idea of a shark attacking people has been reinvented as parody, and as a tense thriller. The MCU is not dead, but it has entered its next phase in the cultural consciousness. Like Star Wars, it's going to become a franchise that people love to criticize, and that's going to make us love it even more.
That makes no sense.
Actually, it makes perfect sense. Earlier, I talked about how we all feel a personal connection to Star Wars because it imprinted on us when we were kids, and the MCU has imprinted on us in a similar way, even if you watched it when you were an adult. So, when The Phantom Menace was released, we saw that Star Wars was not just what we thought it was. It could look different, it could sound different, it had farts. This is when the OT fans of my generation began to engage with Star Wars as adults. We stopped treating the story as if it was something really happening that was magical canon in space, and we were able to criticize it as a film to enter discourse and debate. That is when we realized that criticizing Star Wars is almost as much fun as enjoying it. Becoming critical of a franchise allows you to enjoy it on a different level. As children, we don't have many barriers between ourselves and enjoyment, but as adults, we have a lot getting in our way. There's prior expectations, film quality, newness. So if something is so good that it breaks through all of those barriers, then we love it even more. But also, debating or criticizing the MCU makes us active participants in the MCU. Criticism makes us connect with it on a different level.
But mostly I hate the way I don't hate you. Not even close. Not even a little bit.
I mean, hell, WWE fans love to criticize the WWE. It is an important part of loving wrestling. I guarantee you that someday you will look back and say, hey, put on Secret Invasion for fun. Remember how bad that show is? Look at that silly arm on that lady. Now, we are already seeing this happen with Star Wars. Those prequel films that ruined your childhood are now part of your kid's childhood. Or maybe you love them because you're nostalgic about the early 2000s, whatever.
Or one could argue that the monetization of nostalgia has created like this capitalist feedback loop with increasingly diminishing returns.
Colton, shut the f*** up. I'm making art.
How dare you?
But I want to leave you with this. This has already happened to Marvel before in the comics. Just as Marvel Studios' production style aped the comics, today the studio is reflecting the history of the comic book company. The 1960s were an incredible age of creativity for Marvel, with creators like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Bill Everett working with Stan Lee to create superheroes unlike any we had seen before. Ditko left Spider-Man after just 3 years, and Jack Kirby left for DC in 1970, while Stan Lee took on an editorial role and wrote far fewer word bubbles than he used to. Now, this is a lot like Marvel Studios, which lost several of its top-tier stars and creators after Endgame. So then, the 1970s Marvel comics were created by people who were fans of the 60s comics, including the great Roy Thomas. But what's interesting is that post-Endgame, we're seeing Marvel Studios adapt many characters who debuted in the 70s. The Eternals, Shang-Chi, Moon Knight, She-Hulk, Blade. The 1970s comics forced creators to get weird and try new things as they searched for their identity. And we're seeing the same thing happen with Marvel Studios right now.
I'm the hottest, you ain't never gotta heat me up.
Oh, you are way more fun than my last lawyer.
I will kill for you, Megan Thee Stallion.
Dial it back.
The point is, guys, the MCU, like Star Wars, is limitless. I have been reading comics all of my life, and trust me, the studios have barely scratched the surface of the amazing stories that they can bring to the screen. Not just the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but there's Nova, Quasar, Machine Man, the original Human Torch, Silver Surfer, Sentry. Even the damn Rawhide Kid would make a great movie. Hell, someday they may even take another crack at Secret Invasion.
Perhaps someday you may be ready. Until then, Mogwai will be waiting.
All Marvel has to do is get the right people, the right creative, tell the suits to get the hell out of the way, and then pay those creatives what they're worth. Also, please keep making Disney Plus shows. But what do you guys think? Is the MCU dead? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.